This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, December 21st, 2023. And I have the awesome Ben here. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hello, Miriam. I am doing well. How are you doing?
I'm really good. It's very close to Christmas. In fact, I believe that when I publish this, it'll be Christmas Eve day. So for those of you who celebrate that, happy holidays, right?
Happy holidays. That's right.
So Ben, it's awesome to have you here. And I'm wanting to talk about a few things that I think are going to span across a whole bunch of your areas of expertise. So, it's been an interesting week because on one hand, it's the holidays. Everybody's checked out. But at the same time, there's a bunch of stuff happening. For example, the whole Apple saga with the Apple Watch, right? And the other thing that happened is Intel launched their Core Ultra series, which I think is a big deal. I'm not a big Intel fan, but I have to admit, that is a big deal, right? And then, of course, the thing I want to start with, I think is going to be a lot of fun, is let's go through our top 5 phones of the year. I just published mine on the various social media. I have a list. Do you have a list?
I can give you 4 because I don't get as many devices as you.
Do you have runner-ups or something? Is that why you only have 4? Or do you have
No, I just only have the 4 sort of flagships because I don't get fun stuff from Oppo
China
and Vivo
and, stuff,
and Red and Xiaomi like you do. So I have the more known ones by a US audience, I should say.
Okay, well, what are your top 4? Let's start with that.
All right. So I because I'm an iPhone person, I think everyone needs to just recognize that right out from the outset. iPhone 15 Pro Max is my default for various reasons, not just iMessage, which is a wonderful debate, but that's not the reason that Ben is on an iPhone. But iPhone's my top. The second is the OnePlus Open, which I just very much love. The third is Google Pixel 8. And the fourth is Galaxy S24.
Wow, look at that. You have 4 of mine as well in there. Not in the same order, but nonetheless.
Correct.
I mean, look, the reality is I did not get a lot of the really, really awesome flagships from Asia this year. I got close, but I did not get the ones I really wanted. I never got the Find X6 Pro from Oppo, which was their flagship phone as far as non-folding goes. I never got the Xiaomi 13 Ultra, which was China only. Those 2 phones were China only, which I think is why the PR folks only sent a very small amount of them out. Because in previous years, those were available in West, so they would send them to me. So I put them in as runner-ups because if I had them, and based on my experience using them briefly with my colleagues' devices, they're really great. So is the new Vivo that just came out, the Vivo X100 Pro, which we saw at MediaTek Summit, right? That's the one that has the Dimensity 9300. And from, looking at Ben Sin's review of it so far, it's possibly the best camera phone for stills on the market today. But it's probably going to get eclipsed by something next month, it's the way the nature of the beast right now. What's interesting is that you have 4 of my 5, and my 5th is just the Moto Razr, the 2023, the Razr Plus specifically. And the reason I picked that is because I feel like flip phones are a thing, more so than book-style folding phones. I think that the average person out there is more likely, if they're not an iPhone user, to buy a flip phone folding phone than a book-style folding phone. Both from a cost perspective and from it's relatable, right? So what's your take on that? Do you think that, first of all, you would have picked that one versus, say, the Z Flip 5 from Samsung? And do you think it's a product that consumers out there like or want?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's 2 things. I agree with you 100% that the flipping foldable phones are probably a much more mainstream product than folding out foldable phones. I think you just generally have seen, obviously they're not as expensive, so they've sold better. We know that from carrier data. We know that from Bean Tracker's data of the analyst firms, friends of mine who have to count devices. I don't have to do that, but friends of mine that do that, we know the flipping foldables are selling better. I think the challenge with this, though, to be honest with you, and we do research on this, so we try to get a pulse of consumers' opinions on a range of things. There is still a durability concern about every flipping or folding phone, and I think that's still holding back the market some. You've got normal people who might appreciate that form factor, but are still going with a Galaxy or a Pixel or a non-flipping phone just because they're still very concerned about the durability. And I do think we're 4 years into this now for the most part of mainstream devices. Yeah, I think it's still a concern. I would have expected it to be farther, but I understand it's very, very hard to do cover glass that's actual glass. It's still plastic. There's still issues broadly with that. I think when they can overcome those, you'll start to see that market take off more. But in general, I agree. I think a flipping device is probably more attractive than a folding device, just because I'm not sure anybody wants a pocketable tablet at this point, in their pockets, purses, or wherever you put your device.
Hold that thought, though, because I want to come back to that in the context of discussing the OnePlus Open. But at the same time, my take, I think, is I feel a little more optimistic than you. I think, look, take Theo, my spouse, for example. They have a Z Flip 3 as a secondary phone because, we have two SIMs in 2 countries, and they have an iPhone as their main phone. And they have not managed to destroy that thing yet after 2 years, which is, they're the average consumer. They're not really paying attention. The thing's in a case. It's been dropped. We had to replace the screen protector once from Samsung. Cost us $29 because it was starting to peel off. And it was more of a preventative thing because I was worried that potentially it would break. But now that I've reviewed the Z Flip 5, I feel like that phone is ready for prime time. I think you can probably not even use a case on that phone and be really rude to it and still have it live. The reason I picked the Razer Plus 2023 from Moto as one of my top 5 is because I feel like they kind of finally nailed what they initially planned to do. Right? With the original folding Razer that was kind of a mess in 2019.
Right.
They finally delivered on their kind of vision, and it's very well rounded. The cameras could be better, of course, but I don't feel like the Z Flip 5 is particularly great on the imaging front either. Like, I'm hoping that next year that there's going to be a focus for Samsung. We've seen what Oppo can do with the Find N3 Flip, which I also have. And I briefly had that in my top 5 instead of the Razer, but because it's not really widely available in Western markets, especially in North America, I decided to go for the Razer. But for me, it's the Razer is definitely not feeling as durable as the Z Flip 5, but I feel that it's so sleek and slim and attractive to me. I think it's a beautiful phone. I feel like the Z Flip 4 before, last year, for example, was more attractive because it had more real estate to personalize it. Remember the colors? Like, I think that Samsung needs to go back to that, somehow provide some customization colors. And it's ironic too, because you remember Moto Maker back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Like Moto should be the one doing this, right? If anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. I think when it comes to my list, there's some context that I think everybody needs to understand. The first is, like, prior to getting the OnePlus Open, if you would have asked Ben, if you had to ditch your iPhone and buy any Android product, what would it be? I've always said Pixel. I mean, I was back into the Nexus stage.
Same.
My favorite product was standard stock Google that they gave to developers. I loved it. It was clean. It had the look and feel that I want. It performed like I want, always. It wasn't until I got that OnePlus where I was like, I've changed my mind. If I had to pick an Android phone right now, it would be the OnePlus Open. But it's the software. Like, there's something about how visually appealing from an iPhone person's perspective, right? I'm very picky about my Android. Like, I do not love Samsung's operating system. I don't love the icons. I think they're ugly and they bother me. And I look at them and I'm like, I can't use this phone. I can't use it because I don't like the UI. Whereas Pixel is always like, I love it. I love everything about the UI. It's all clean. It's fresh, fantastic. But the OnePlus, it has all of that. Like, it's got iPhone UI design to it. It's buttery. It's smooth. It doesn't, like, Miriam, I'll tell you, it bothers me that every Android phones I use why do they jitter when I scroll? How long has this been?
All of them.
Why can't it be smooth? But the OnePlus is smooth. It feels like my iPhone. And that's why, like, when I used it, I was like, man, this to me is like the new bar of Android devices. And it's now like Pixel's a great phone. But to me, if I had to pick, I would pick something from OnePlus. And I really like the Open. I really like the Open. For various reasons, it's a great device.
You know how I said hold your thought on the Open earlier? Well, I could copy paste what you just said and it would apply to me. Like, I'm a Pixel Nexus person at heart. Pixel 8 Pro is still my main phone, but barely. You know, the only reason I haven't jumped to the Open 100% yet is because it doesn't have wireless charging. And, you know, that's a minor thing. That's a me thing more than anything.
Totally.
But I love what you just said. I don't like One UI because Samsung, again, it's just convoluted. It's just ugly. I just don't like it. It doesn't feel right. I love the hardware, but I just don't like the user experience.
Yes.
I love the iPhone user experience, but I don't like the lack of flexibility in the workflow of the OS, which is more like the way I handle. I think it's more of a question of a habit than anything else at this point. But the aesthetics of the iPhone are great. And I think you're right that, you know, Oxygen OS / Color OS / Realme UI, they're pretty much all the same. Although I think OnePlus has a few little gems in there that are a little specific to them. But overall, that has developed into one of my favorite user experiences as well. And all this to say that I did not care about folding book style phones until the Open. I was like, I'd used every Z Fold from Samsung. I'd used some of the Chinese ones. And I was just like, yeah, this is cool. I get it. I'm a nerd. I love the idea of a phone that turns into a tablet. It's super cool, but I don't need this in my life. Like, Pixel 8 Pro is still my main phone because of that. But this year, it's been really hard for me because, like, I am so torn. I'm so close to making the switch. You know, because obviously, like you, I also have an iPhone in my pocket, you know, most of the time, not always, sometimes just in my bag. But yeah, it's incredible how aligned we are. And if you look at my list, like in my order, it's, you know, OnePlus Open, followed by the, the Pixel 8 Pro, followed by the Galaxy S23 Ultra, followed by the Razr, and followed by the iPhone. The only reason the iPhone is last is simply because I'm not primarily an iPhone user, so I lumped all the, I lumped all of the Android phones first. But this is, you know, if you ask me right now, what is the best phone that I've used all year? OnePlus Open, 100%. And
agreed.
Pixel 8 Pro is very close, but I am very vexed still by Tensor and Tensor's lack of overall, like, I don't know. It's like, I think a lot of what we see in the responsiveness of the OnePlus has been in previous OnePlus devices and some Oppo devices as well. And, you know, it is optimized, but it's also Snapdragon, like, to some extent. Like, agreed. I also feel that, to be honest with you, on the Xiaomi that I recently reviewed, it's I think coming out on Geekspin shortly, the 13T Pro, which is a Dimensity 9200 Plus from MediaTek, is just as silky smooth as the OnePlus. So I know that it's a software optimization issue, but I still feel that at the root, at the base, at the foundation, Tensor is just not living up to the competition. And we see that in the benchmarks, we see that in the thermals, we see that in the radio performance. It's gotten better for sure, much better. But I still don't think it's there. And my question to you as an analyst, as somebody who looks at all of this, like, do you think that Google is going to be able to eventually make a chip that can compete? Even, you know, if they go solo or with Samsung or whatever, or do you think they'll switch back to Qualcomm or MediaTek?
So I do not think they will switch back to Qualcomm and MediaTek at this point. To be honest with you, I have some questions as to the longevity of made by Google hardware in the grand scheme of the BUs that Google has to be responsible for and provide revenue for. These just don't sell in volume. I understand why they do it. I'm not even sold that we continue to see that over the course of the long haul. I hope I'm wrong, but it is a struggle. That being said, they are 100% committed to this because the reality here is they did benefit. So the team that does TPU cores in Google's data center did benefit from the hardware client team SoC work. So there was collaborative value, whether or not that's going to be more value in their data center products for GCP or their smartphones. So that was worth it, in my opinion, that they got those learnings. They were, 2 or 3 chips in. They collaborated with Samsung on that. We all know that. And that benefited now their data center efforts. So I can see why that was happening, and that will continue. I think it's going to be very hard, though, to be honest with you, because I don't know how deep in the weeds your listeners are about ARM IP
We're
and ARM
nerds
licenses.
here. You can go nuts.
Okay.
Don't worry, they'll read up on
right,
it.
Google is not making a chip that is essentially an architectural innovation, right? They're using standard off the shelf IP, which is what MediaTek does, although MediaTek has a little bit more secret sauce in a couple other areas. Whereas Qualcomm is now moving back to totally custom cores. And we know that that's going to bring them a pretty significant advantage amongst the competition and in light of what Apple does, who is a custom architecture, a custom ARM architecture on iPhone. Google's going to have a really hard time competing with that. I've always believed that. I think that's not going to change despite innovations they think they can do with Samsung. It might get close, but I'm just not sure it's ever going to be fully get there. But I think we have to also back up and say, well, what does how much better look like, right? If I did a camera test with all of these, as I'm sure you did, both self-portraits and low light. They're all pretty close. Like, it's really just like a couple of years ago, if we would have done this, I would have told you which phones were the best in low light and portrait. It was hands down a couple of devices and nothing else was close. Now you try it and you're like, I can't tell. My kids can't tell. My wife can't. Like, no one can tell which phone it is. They all look really good.
And speaking to that, for me, the OnePlus Open is the first OnePlus that I've used where I'm like, okay, I can live with this camera. It matches my expectations, which are very high. And it's surprising how often I use it. I use it more than my Pixel 8 Pro right now for photos, which is kind of incredible. It's never happened before.
Yeah.
But to go back to what you were saying, my concern is also like yours, that I don't think, like, they're supporting those phones for 7 years now, right? Google. And I don't think that's realistic, because I don't think the hardware lasts that long. Their hardware is not that good. Like, it's not like Apple or Samsung who make bulletproof hardware. Like, my Pixel 3 XL, which is the Pixel I used the longest, almost 3 years because I was lazy. Didn't like the 4 because it didn't have a fingerprint sensor and my apps didn't work for bioauthentication. I didn't like the 5 because it was small. So I went from the 3 XL to the 6 Pro. 3 years, and it was falling apart. And I'm careful. And so I don't think their hardware can handle that. So my question would be then, because, originally a lot of people said, well, they want Tensor because if they're going to support for 7 years, with Qualcomm or MediaTek, it's going to fall off the cliff, the support, right? But my thought is this: why don't they use Snapdragon or MediaTek and then have a separate NPU chip that is made in-house by Google that does all that cool stuff? I mean, Vivo does it for their image processing. Oppo used to do it with Mary Silicon X. Like, why not do that? And we all get a better experience. And you only fire up the chip when you need it.
Yeah. So the issue is, I think that Google has, and you would be entirely right if this was just a camera conversation. Yeah. I think Google has. So first of all, right, when you think about designing processors, it's best to have as much on the SoC as possible. You actually don't want stuff disaggregated from the design. In fact, this is like exactly what you and I were talking about in MediaTek. The sole reason that Apple wants to do this modem stuff is because they want to put it on the SoC. They don't want a separate.
It's efficiency in terms of power, in terms of thermals, in terms of all kinds of things. Yeah. Right.
So if you were to extract the NPU from Tensor for now generative AI applications, which I think will come to devices, consumer devices, to do interesting things like just image editing, right? Just tell it what you want to do. Replace my face with whoever else, or give me the best smile, whatever, right? Use text, use a line of syntax to operate your device. That's going to come at a UI level. A lot of that's going to take place on the NPU. If you move that off the SoC, you're going to get lower efficiency, possibly some latency, and it's going to hurt your battery life. So I think because it's not just camera, that's why everybody we talk to is saying, I got to put an NPU on it, because they want all those Gen AI features that are coming in terms of best performance per watt for inference and AI
No,
on
I
device.
get it.
So
You're right.
yeah,
Yeah. I just, I've always just feel like my Pixel 8 Pro would be the best phone if it had a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in it. That's all.
yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I also, again, like, you and I used Nexus devices and Pixels when they did run Qualcomm, and I still had stutter issues with them. Like, it wasn't like they were smooth and buttery, and like that didn't go away. So I don't know what that problem is, to be honest with you.
I think that's
I don't know if it's-
optimizations, because look at what Oppo is doing in OnePlus.
Well, so okay, so then this is an important point. This is because I think we have to appreciate why those experiences are what you and I are saying we appreciate visually. In China, they had to do that to compete with the iPhone. It had to have an iPhone. Like, Google has not had to really do that, in my opinion.
But Samsung doesn't do that here.
Well, that's that again, but they also don't do that in China. I think my point is the Chinese OEMs, so BBK and everybody, all those subsidiaries plus Xiaomi, had to do that in order for their devices to gain any level of success in China. Now, Samsung is doing okay in China. They're seeing a resurgence thanks to the Qualcomm relationship. Again, their software's got to get fixed, but regardless, but Pixel hasn't had to do that. But I think that truly Android in our market has never really faced a true Apple competition the same way. They've already had their audience, right? Generally, if you grew up on Android, if you're a Droid user, you didn't really leave. Like, for the most part, you stayed with Android. Like, that's just the reality of it, right? And so there isn't, like, people talk about churn, and we see these numbers. There is churn, but it's not drastic. Like, we're not talking 40% of the market switching over to iPhones. It's single-digit percentages, maybe on a quarterly basis. That's not a lot of churn. It's churn, but it's not a lot of churn. So that's my point. Is in China, like, they had to have a elegant visual UI that went toe to toe with Apple in order to compete. And you and I are now seeing the benefits of that. So we look at it and we're like, I like it. And that's the reason why.
It's a good point. Yeah. Let's switch to Apple Watch conversation. I just think it's kind of incredible that we're ending the year and I can say the best phone this year was not only a OnePlus phone, but a folding OnePlus phone.
Agreed.
It's amazing. I'm very impressed. I hope they continue in this direction. And I'm kind of liking this idea that they're insinuating, at least for now, where Oppo is the brand in the rest of the world and OnePlus is the brand in the West.
Yes.
Because you know what? That makes way more sense to me than what they were trying to do before, where they were stepping on each other's toes in some markets.
Totally. And I think today, from a Western standpoint, like, if people are saying, like, hey, I'm an Android user, what phone should I check out? Again, it would have always been Pixel. And I'm not saying don't check out a Pixel, but I would 100% encourage people to now just check out OnePlus. OnePlus 12 is on the horizon. And, I would look at these phones because I think they're really freaking good.
I agree. So Apple Watch, Massimo, what's your take on this? Yeah, that's it. What's going on here? Like, did you think Apple really thought that the government were just going to override this somehow? Is that what was happening here, or what?
I think they would have been very unwise to assume that would happen again. I think they figured that this would either get resolved, or, to be honest with you, I think they figured they could figure this out in software, and that hasn't happened. But, this is, you and I have been covering this for a long time. Like, this is not something Apple normally caves into. Like, this is kind of like the real first time.
This is why I don't understand. Like, wouldn't they have bought them or something? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I think they could have, right, come to a cross-license deal. Maybe they tried, right? We have no idea. Those legal things are always behind the scenes that we don't know. We don't know what they tried. All we know is whatever they were infringed against, this one bit that they lost, is now actually going to result in the lack of sales until either they settle or the government steps in, right, and they can start selling these again. So, and I saw I saw a note. So again, right, everyone probably understands Apple makes a butt ton of money every single quarter, but I saw a note that came out that said this could impact roughly $2 billion of revenue sales, which, again, not a lot. That's probably 2 weeks of iPhone, of maybe a week of iPhone sales, to be honest with you, maybe a day. I don't know. I haven't run those numbers, but it's not an insignificant amount, but it's also not a giant amount. So in the grand scheme of how much that's going to hurt, but this is the first time we've seen Apple actually stop selling something because they actually were in a patent issue with either a competitor or someone else on patent infringement.
But do you think that this company has a leg to stand on here? Like, is this really important? Or are they just patent trolling at this point?
Well, I mean, they are a company that does have medical patents. I mean, they've got multiple products, not just this watch, but blood oxygen monitors. I think it's important to know there is a cross suit from Apple claiming that they also stole IP from Apple and were using that in their watches. So I do think it's important to know that both companies have some borrowing, I guess, of ideas that's going on, but they're suing each other, and just to the degree that pans itself out. But, you know, I mean, again, right, I don't think the Trade Commission would have stuck on this if they didn't have a leg to stand on. Apple has very good lawyers. And this very small company succeeded in basically getting a patent upheld. So there must be something there. I don't know what. But again, they're suing each other for patent infringement. So take that as you will.
So what do you think the possible resolutions are here? A software update, and that would be an interim solution, right?
Yeah.
Because this is a software patent, correct? It's not a hardware patent, is it?
Well, it's related to the blood oxygen monitor, but I do believe that there's a feature that they're using that they would need to disable. I'm not exactly sure which one, but you could fix it through software. It would, however, be a truncated version of what was promised. So I'm not really sure how well that's going to go over. But I think I don't see them honestly settling. They don't normally do that. So I do think they're trying to figure out how to solve this in software, but I don't know what that looks like. That would be my guess at a resolution.
It's probably going to go to court then, is what you're saying.
Likely. Yeah. Unless the government steps in and says,
well,
no, we
they
veto.
don't seem to care though right now. Do you think is this because the time of year they're just checked out? Or is it just because the last time with the iPhone patent dispute, the government intervened, right?
Right, but I also think that's the iPhone, right? The watch the watch sells fine,
it's
but it's not going to sell a ton.
Almost mission critical to the US, right?
Yes, correct. And the government who uses that device regularly.
That's what I was going to say,
because of its security. Yeah.
Let's talk about Intel Core Ultra. My stance. I love Intel because I think they are, one of the oldest semiconductor companies. They do some really cool stuff. But I am being kind of confused with their strategy ever since they got rid of X-Scale, because I could see years ago, from the early days of RISC that ARM was the future. Like back in the 80s when the Cyan Organizer came out and I was covering not covering because I was an engineer. I was reading magazines about the, BBC Archimedes. I was like, this chip architecture is amazing. This is the future. And, I was young. I was a teenager. I didn't know better. But, here we are 40 years later. And the reality is, yes, ARM rules the world and ARM is the way to go. A RISC-V is probably there too. But I don't feel x86 really has much more of a future. And I'm not sure why they're not seeing that. Do you think it's just cultural or what? Because that chip to me looks like an SoC. It does not look like an x86 chip at all. It looks like it's basically, there's some tiny bit of x86 in a corner and everything else looks like a giant SoC. And that's great. But why not just go ARM? Let's just call it a day and move on. Like, what is their deal?
Well, so there's a lot to unpack there. There's two things. You're entirely correct in the view of when x86 made monolithic chip designs, which was basically what Apple and Qualcomm make right now. They're monolithic designs. It's the same die, same chip, only broken up into different blocks. There was no way that x86 in a monolithic design was going to catch up on performance per watt with ARM. It just wasn't going to happen. What you are seeing now, though, with AMD and Intel is that now that they're moving to 3D stacked and chiplet architectures, so mixing and matching 7 nanometer with 5 nanometer, maybe a little 3 nanometer sprinkled in there, etc., you're actually seeing better performance per watt. Now, again, it's not quite Apple and or what we'll see with Qualcomm with X Elite, but It's gotten closer. And so my point is, if there's hope, the hope is in this new mix and matching of chiplet architectures because it's promising, but it's also not surpassed it yet and gotten us to a point where we can confidently say at the leading edge, mixing and matching chiplets in this new architecture gets you to that level of efficiency, but it's a big step forward. If you look at what Meteor Lake is, so Intel Core Ultra, right, codenamed Meteor Lake, compared to where they were, directionally going with monolithic designs, and AMD would tell you the same thing. If you look back at a couple generations of Ryzen cores where they're now on their second generation 3D stacked chiplet, prior to that, they would have all said we had a lot of trouble getting to some of these performance per watch benchmarks that we're seeing in SoC. They've gotten past that now with these chiplet architectures. So we're still early in that for x86. I think it will continue to get close. The difference being Apple is very, very fortunate that they are the lead customer for TSMC leading edge, and Qualcomm will be very close to there also with a couple of options. And they have access to really good leading edge technologies for their monolithic SoCs. You know, AMD does this also, but they don't ship in nearly the volume that Apple does. And so the hard part is we're not really seeing a true comparison, right? If you took Apple at a 5 nanometer and just used some persistent comparison to an Intel at a 453 die, they're actually going to be pretty close. But Apple has this lead thanks to TSMC, and that's just really hard to compete with.
Do you think that, I mean, okay, crazy idea. I know Intel's a fab company, but why not? I mean, assuming TSMC had the bandwidth, why not farm this out to TSMC 3 nanometer for some of it?
So they are with the next product that's coming down the table. I don't remember what part is public of that they're using for TSMC for Lunar Lake. It's some portion of that. So we will actually see. But again, these are chiplet designs, so only one part of that tile.
Right. I get that.
Will be a 3 nanometer. So it's not Apple has a whole monolithic, right, at 3 nanometer and then at 2 nanometer. Nobody else is going to have that. To be honest with you, Qualcomm will be 12 to 24 months behind. Yeah, to that with a monolithic. So it's just really tough to compare. But my point is, you're seeing positivity with these 3D stacked architectures on chiplets for SoCs. That give me hope it's moving in the right direction, perhaps faster than if they were just a true monolithic x86 design. But again, Apple's just always going to have the most volume and the preferential treatment at the leading edge. And just in general, that's hard to compete with. And then you put the fact that they're very good designers. Like Apple has some of the best silicon designers on the planet. It just makes it really hard to compete with.
Yeah. I'm impressed with what I'm seeing, but like a lot of, pundits out there, like Dave 2D did a video where I think he nailed it. It's like, okay, so you got to parity now, but like you're not really exceeding in any way, right? So
exactly.
And that's good because obviously if you're in x86 land, Windows still runs better on x86. We all know that. So I think, probably a good time to buy a Windows laptop with this new chip to hold you over for a few years. But I want to see more. And I'm just not sure, like, I don't know. And where do you think Intel's going long term? Like, are they going to, since they are always going to be a little behind by not accessing this monolithic 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer, whatever the next nanometer is, are they, how can they survive in this environment? Like,
Sure. So I think there's two things, right? So I think we have to step back and remember that even though Intel has taken lump after lump after lump for, what do you want to give it, 5-7 years now, they still have 80% share of PCs. So like, okay, so you take that and you say, they were behind. People criticized them. They made bad decisions. They lost the leading edge in that timeline, yet the best AMD could get was 20%. And now Intel's closing the gap. They're actually executing at every level now in terms of product design and whatnot. So I kind of look at this and I say, if the best they bled was 20%, I'm just not sure now that they're actually getting to parity with some of these things. I don't see how you could argue that they're just going to bleed more share because they're not actually that far behind anymore. So there's part of that. The other is, I think you have to recognize, and this is the same point I'll make for AMD, is both of those companies will increasingly over the next 4 to 5 years just make way more money in the data center. I mean, they're just going to
No,
print
there is
money
that for
in the
sure.
data center.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not
So
too
because of
worried
that-
about that for sure, but I'm
But be-
just more like consumer long term. You know, you can't rely on just business, right? Like the volume is in consumer, right? Or is data center volume enough?
No, I mean, data center money is enough to basically fuel and
Right.
subsidize anything. It's the same with AMD, right? That just subsidizes client. They've got enough money that client only helps them get wafer volume to keep fabs full, which is relevant, right? There's the foundry question to Intel's future, not just client. But I
Right.
think their product roadmap for PCs will remain competitive. I think AMD, I'm a little bit worried about. Qualcomm, I'm optimistic on. So I think that's going to shake itself out. But I don't really see Intel bleeding that much share, even as Qualcomm starts to ramp with more volume with X Elite and version 2 of that, et cetera, right? So it's good that they're getting back. I think, again, the challenge is just make a notebook that lasts 10 hours. You know, I mean, I don't know if you remember, I know you were in the industry when this happened, but there was a day in 2008 where Intel came out and basically said, our goal is 8 hours in 2008.
I remember
We
that.
didn't even have 8 hours last year.
I know.
2 years ago, I didn't have 8 hours on a notebook. So it was like, just friggin' get 8 to 10 hours. Like it took you more than a decade to fulfill that process. But now, right, we could probably see 12, 14. I think they were saying some versions of the Meteor XQ could get 20 hours at the 20-watt version. So,
Awesome.
You know, it's all day.
I love it. I'm looking forward to testing one of those, to be frank. So we got a bunch of news items, a lot of his leaks and rumors, some new phone launches that are not as obscure as you think, because these are actual products that are coming to the US despite being Chinese phones, which is kind of cool. So let's talk about some Samsung stuff first. There are 3 Samsung news items. The first one is that Samsung has added folding phones to its self-repair program, which I think is a big deal. Like, I mean, I'm all for right to repair and self-repair. And so that's awesome. But that's a pretty bold thing. Like, it's already pretty hard to fix a phone, even if you're skilled with, you know, electronics and taking things apart. And I can only imagine that taking apart a folding phone is probably going to be even harder. So some people can do it. And the fact that they can now get the parts and the access to all the information they need is really exciting. This is a good move, yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to our earlier point about what are some of those things that can help push that market forward, knowing that you're not just completely out if you crack your phone or break your phone and you've got some confidence that can be fixed, I think is an important element of those products now getting more into the mainstream. Because to be honest with you, that is, you actually hear this from people when they buy iPhones, when I'll say, like, why do you keep buying iPhones? And for the most part, they're like, well, if anything happens to it, I know I'm covered. I know Apple takes care of me.
I mean, it's so good. The Apple Store and Apple Repair setup is just like nobody does it better. Like when I got that screen protector replaced by Samsung, I went to Palo Alto's Samsung store, which is the only location. I live in San Francisco, and I actually had to go to Palo Alto to get this done, which is kind of insane to me. Whereas Apple Store, I would have been able to go to like half a dozen of them within almost walking distance from my house, right? Yeah. So that just tells you in Silicon Valley what it's like. So yeah, no, I think this is great because if you have a repair shop in your neighborhood that might not, you know, do folding phones very often, now they can learn to do it. They can get the parts, they can get the expertise. And so that offloads some of that from Samsung. And I think that's great news. And the other 2 pieces of news are kind of related. There are rumors around the S24 Ultra cameras. Yeah. And basically what we're learning is that Samsung's probably going to copy what Apple did with the 24 megapixel mode, like an output option, so that maybe by default the main camera will shoot at 24 megapixels instead of 12. And there's also rumors of a better improved low light mode or night mode with the main camera. Nothing too surprising, honestly. I think that the S24 Ultra right now is going to be very much an evolution on the existing S23 Ultra. Sure. But I do think it's interesting that they're going to switch that one lens to a 5x telephoto instead of a 3x. And that's going to be a larger sensor, because even though they're keeping apparently the smaller sensor 10x zoom, you know, sensor fusion is a thing. Having a 50 megapixel at 5x, you can combine some of that data with the 12 or 10 megapixel at 10x. And
Yep.
so I think that, and add the special sauce of Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 ISP in there, we're going to see a noticeable improvement, I think, in imaging, but don't expect it to be too revolutionary. I think this is going to be very much the same as going from the S22 Ultra to the S23 Ultra, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will be curious to see what vector any new image sensor puts on quality. But again, right, that comes back to the enthusiasts, right, point of view, right? People who really care about those little details, which it does matter. The normals, like we talked about, they can't always tell the difference of these things. But I think the new sensors, the obviously the higher megapixel resolution plus the better cropping that comes in when you zoom, like these are things people care about. And then again, I always try to remind everybody, right? The hardest thing to do is compare year over year. Samsung's most of their base that upgrades is coming from 2, 3, sometimes 4-year-old devices. So for a lot of them, it's the same with iPhone. You jump 4 years, it's actually a pretty big difference in camera quality and feel. So a year-over-year innovation is a big innovation to somebody who's had a phone for 4 years.
100%. Somebody upgrading to the S24 Ultra from an S20 Ultra or S21 Ultra is going to notice for sure. And, honestly, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if the S24 Ultra is on my top 5 next year. Like, this has been kind of the bread and butter of everything but the kitchen sink awesomeness of Samsung hardware for years. Like, I feel like they cannot not do this product. It exists in a niche of its own, having the stylus and everything. I feel like in terms of hardware, if you have to point at the most advanced phone in the world, it's always the S Ultra, in my opinion. Now, the software is a whole different story. And of course, user experience is a combination of both of these. But look at it this way. If you hand me an S Ultra phone of any kind, I will be happy and I will be able to use it, being confident that I have some of the best that money can buy. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I think this is why it continues to be a success. And I think merging the S Ultra with the Note was really smart. I think that,
agreed.
Those days are over. The folding phones are definitely their next big thing. And that's where I'm hoping Samsung does the most changes next year. I'm really hoping that they look at the competition, now that they have competition in the West, in North America in particular, and go, oh, we really should do something about our folding and flip phones, right?
Yeah, well, because I think if they did some of these things we talked about, right, and even get that form factor right, which is what I really love about the OnePlus Open, it's just a great size.
The Open's form factor is gold.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
But if they did those things, like you'd have to imagine that they could just immediately increase their share because they've nailed the form factor to an audience who I think will appreciate some of those very little subtle design things because they're the dominant player in the West that nail those parts on foldables, and boom, I think you've instantly turned a corner for yourself.
I think it'll be really telling to see what happens in August when they launch these phones. I think we'll know very quickly whether they've got it or not. If they don't come close to what the Open is delivering, both in software and hardware, they are, they're not going to be as successful. I mean, OnePlus/Oppo is not going to sit on their laurels. They're going to do something else. And, hopefully they're not going to screw it up. That's the thing I'm always afraid of with BBK Group is that like half the time they're cruising along doing great. And then somebody does something really stupid decision-wise. And next thing you know is they're like, you remember how they lost all their momentum for a while there? Ugh.
Yeah.
At least with Samsung, you know that even if they're very incremental, it's still going to be rock solid. Like if, again, somebody gave me an Z Fold 5, I'd be a very happy camper. Like it's not my favorite phone, but
sure. Well, and I think the reality is they've still got a very strong brand with a lot of people very loyal to the Samsung brand, which is why, I think if they nailed some of these things, honestly, Miriam, I would be just shocked if they don't get some of this right. Like we're talking about the OnePlus for next fall. If they don't, I think we got to ask some very serious questions about that company if they can't fix some of these things and at least take some of the things that work for the OnePlus Open. But because they have that brand, I think anybody who sees the quality of a fold that's now got the right screen size, really nailed the inside and the outside user experiences and the software, I think their brand loyalists are ready to make more of that jump. They haven't loved what they've seen so far, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think there's also another element, right? You're looking at market share and you're looking at all that as an analyst for sure. But to me, mind share is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
Like us pundits, us journalists, us, YouTube creators, us analysts, we are very influential. Right now, the fact that we've been singing the praises of the OnePlus Open since September and put it on our top 5 lists, I think that Samsung as a corporate entity underestimates the power of that. The power of word of mouth, the power of, the conversation. And I'm not saying they're not going to sell more phones than Samsung anytime soon, Oppo and OnePlus, but I'm just saying that if Samsung sits on their laurels, they erode some of that. Like I felt like they eroded some of that, excitement for us, and their mind share has decreased somewhat because of it. And you do that enough times. Look at what happened to OnePlus for a while. It was the darling. And then overnight, it went from like, So it's not just the smaller companies that are subject to this. It can happen to anyone. And so I really hope, because, Korea is a little slow at reaction, right? So I really hope that they get it. That they can see that and move fast.
Yeah, me too. Well, we'll see, right? They have to.
See.
They have to.
I'm not worried about the S24 series. I think it's going to be solid.
Totally.
Like this is a no-brainer for them.
Yep.
Oppo has a couple of things that hit the news cycle. So interestingly, Oppo officially confirmed, at least on social media in China, that the X7 Ultra. So the X7 will be their flagship. It's going to be a series. In the past, there's been a regular and a Pro, sometimes a Pro Plus, and sometimes a Lite. But this year, it looks like we're getting a regular and an Ultra. I don't know why they changed the naming, but it looks like the Ultra will be getting a 1-inch version of the Litia sensor that is in the OnePlus Open, which blows my mind because that is a smaller sensor now. And so we're going to be going to 1.6 micron pixels on a stacked pixel sensor, which means that it's basically going to be able to gather twice as much light in those pixel buckets.
Yep.
Which, wow. I mean, 1-inch sensors have their issues because it's really hard to make good lenses with those sensors because you get aberrations on the edges and you get the very shallow depth of field, which I personally love. I'd rather have a bit of aberrations and some really shallow depth of field. But I get how people say it's a bit difficult because sometimes you're trying to take a photo of something and you're just off in focus. But I'm really looking forward to that one. That's got me super stoked right now. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, and I think this is, again, you hear everybody talk about this, like especially whenever we get opportunities to talk to smartphone OEMs and we talk about camera, it always feels like every year their goal is to just get closer and closer to DSLR in some capacity, right? And these are the steps that they take to kind of give you some of those experiences so that it really truly feels like I've got a true DSLR in my pocket. I mean, it feels close now, but anybody who carries a DSLR will be like, nah, it's not even close. I'm still taking my camera to take pictures of my cityscapes and birds out in the field. But that's the thing, like every year, that's their goal. Closer. So bigger image sensors, obviously the way that we can do telescopic lenses, all of this stuff is chasing that direction. And we get a little bit closer every year.
No, I'm excited about it. I mean, this is a thing that I wish, the North American audience would understand. But I know my listeners get it. I know you're, as an analyst, you get it. But it's that, there's this Samsung, Apple world out there. And in terms of hardware, Apple doesn't really push the envelope that much with cameras in the same way as Google for a long time didn't. And now they finally woke up and we're getting some good hardware. But I believe ultimately you need both. And I think that the Chinese right now, I mean, since Huawei back in the day pre-ban have been absolutely leading the pack here. Like when it comes to things like miniaturizing lenses and sensors and actuators and autofocus and folded periscope lenses. And, there's also liquid lenses now. It's just insane to me how this stuff is not coming from Apple or Samsung. Like, you'd think in their leadership position, with the money that they have and the budgets they have, they would be the ones pushing that envelope. But it's the Chinese that are driving it so hard. And it just kind of impresses me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think the unfortunate part is that the companies that you just mentioned, the Samsung and Apple, benefit as those companies pave the way because things like the manufacturing process of those lenses,
Yeah.
all things they're not going to fund, right? Because they just want to get color right. They want to get your AI portraits right? They want to get all these little things right. But those little companies pave the way in manufacturing and components, and then Samsung and even OnePlus, right? And Apple will benefit from that because now they've got some scale and they didn't have to invent that wheel.
Right. The second item related to this is that if you want to see some pretty confident renders of what the basic model will be, the Find X7, check out the link in the show notes. There is a render. It looks very much like the OnePlus 12, to be honest with you, with the camera pod being a little bit more centered than to the left. But this is very interesting because I also have here, this is for the Patreons, I'm going to pull it out. It's in a case, so don't draw conclusions here, but I have the Realme GT5 Pro here, and it's almost the same camera system as the OnePlus Open. And, we've seen the OnePlus 12 specs from China, which is almost the same sensor as, array as on the OnePlus 12. So this Realme that I have right now with Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is a slightly detuned version of the OnePlus 12. The only difference, honestly, is a slightly smaller screen, but it's still 4,500 nits, which is insane. And it's got 8 Gen 3, and it's got the same camera setup as the Open, minus the ultra wide, which is only an 8 megapixel. But we're basically looking at a proto OnePlus 12. And as you know, Realme is another brand under the BBK Group umbrella, which I don't understand why it's not under Oppo right now, because they use the same OS and the same parts bin. Much more like, Vivo has its own little universe going. But like Realme, Oppo, OnePlus might as well be one thing. And so Realme is still separate. It's just weird. But this is interesting because right now I'm playing with a phone that will never get in the West, but it's giving me a very good preview of what to expect from the OnePlus 12. So check out my YouTube and stuff for some more things about that. Two phones I'm excited about because they're coming to the US, because they always come to the US, but they're such a niche player. They're basically sold on the company's website, maybe if you're lucky, Amazon at some point, is the Nubia brand, which is a ZTE derivative. Nubia is also the company who makes the Red Magic phones, which are pretty popular gaming phones. So the Red Magic 9 Pro came out in China a couple of weeks back, and now it's announced as a global phone. So it's coming to the US with 5G support, and it's always one of our favorite phones because in terms of performance and thermals, it just blows everything away with the fan and everything else. And so, I'm excited to review this at some point. I've reviewed pretty much all of them for hot hardware. Starts at $649 US for a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 gaming phone. Hooray. But like every year, these phones are not particularly great when it comes to software experience and camera. But if you can live with that and all you want to do is game and game to the max, like, go for it, right?
Yep. Well, I think, again, I've followed that brand sort of briefly, and I saw some of the pictures of this either last week or whatnot when folks on our team sent them to me. It really is. They have no brand cachet, but I think if people like the experiences you talked about, it's a nice design. I mean, it's very blocky.
Love that very rectangular design they've been going for since the Red Magic 8 last year. And it's interesting because Nubia Z60 Ultra is kind of the non-gamer version of that, with more emphasis on imaging, like more of a flagship. And it's coming to the US, and it's pretty much the same display and chassis, but a slightly different camera system. Much better one, in fact. What stands out to me here is also, again, the pricing, which I think is going to be very impressive. $599 for a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And this is my little love affair with the Nubia series. Every time they do their high-end, like their Ultra or Pro Z series, the last 4 years now, 3 years, we've been getting a 35 millimeter main camera, not a 24. So they're actually putting a narrower lens on the main sensor, and then they put a very large, like 64 or 50 megapixel ultra wide sensor that starts at 13 millimeters or something, so that it covers up to the 1X, which is now 35 millimeter, and it gives you that basically, broader range because of the larger number of pixels that it can crop on. So it's a very interesting approach. I really kind of want more phones in the future to have a 35 millimeter, essentially an 1.4x main lens. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know how common it will be, but I do think it will be interesting to see what that yields in both the camera quality at different focal lengths. But I'm not sure that's a mainstream direction. But
I mean, we're
I
seeing
understand.
Apple and Samsung and even OnePlus now giving us that option to set the 1X to be,
Yeah.
24 or 28 or 35, right? So
Yep.
imagine you do the reverse of that. Maybe the ultra wide handles those, and then the main is actually the 35. That's kind of
Yeah.
what they're doing here, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
interesting. Another thing that I think we're going to see more about at NWC is the Nothing Phone 2A. They're kind of mid-range
Lower
phone,
cost.
like
Yeah.
probably lower than the Phone 1 was in terms of spec, but higher than, a budget phone, basically. So we saw a leak there, nothing really exciting. I just love Nothing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do. MediaTek Dimensity 7200 supposedly on this,
Yeah.
which is very mid-range, right?
Mid-range, totally mid-range. Yeah. But good to have price range options, especially when you're a brand still trying to break into an area, trying to compete more in Europe than the US, where
I think this is more for India
deal.
than anything else. I mean, we'll see it in the rest of the world, but
Huge
I feel
cost.
like they're really trying to, and also it looks like it's got a completely new design with a different glyph design in the back. So I'm actually looking forward to them finally changing things around a little bit, which is fun. I like Nothing. I think it's interesting what they're doing, and I hope that they're going to deliver another great phone. The Nothing Phone 2 to me was definitely up there in my top 10, not top 5, but so yeah, good stuff. Last couple of items are interesting insofar that we've occasionally been following the saga on the podcast here of the North American charging standard, basically the Tesla connector becoming the standard in North America, and how it's going to make EV long distance travel and road tripping better. So a couple of interesting news came out from this. Actually, there's a third one that I can add to that. The SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, did finally ratify this as a standard. So NACS is now known as standard J3400. J1772 is level 2 basic charging using the good old charging connector that every car supports with an adapter for Tesla. But my point is, we now have a standard, which is exciting to me because it means hopefully Tesla can't mess with it. Look, I think I've always been a proponent of this. As soon as Ford announced that they're doing this partnership with Tesla, and then GM jumped in and everybody else pretty much jumped in, I thought this is the way to go because I drive a Tesla. I know how great the supercharger network is. I can't imagine, even though I've driven almost every other EV, I can't imagine doing a road trip in them because, the other charging networks are just not reliable enough and plentiful enough to make it a no-brainer experience. You can plan and make it work, but even then you might run into some snafus. So, it's crazy to me that the, car makers, the legacy manufacturers, didn't understand from the get-go that they needed to develop the network to go along with the car, but they didn't. They treated it like gas stations, and here we are, right? So now we have a great network, and it's very popular in this region, so why not adopt it? And that's basically what this switch to NACS has been about. I've actually got a story on TechRadar coming out about that. More about the outlook of EVs in 2024. I've picked 5 of my favorite upcoming EVs, and I kind of explained how it's going to change the game to have these other car makers using the Tesla supercharger network starting next year. And so along with that, the Volkswagen Group, which includes Porsche, Audi, and a few others, is finally agreed to using NACS as well and to partner with Tesla. Although they're so late now that it's probably not going to happen for customers till 2025. But what's interesting is Stellantis, which is, Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, Jeep, Fiat, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, Lancia, all these companies in Europe, Peugeot, Opel, they are not on board yet. Like, what's your take on this whole thing? Do you think it's going to make a difference that it's now a standard and that Volkswagen is finally joined? Because Volkswagen is Electrify America, right?
Yeah. I think, to be honest with you, if this country, the United States, wants to see EVs get adopted, I just don't see how we do it any other way but adopting this standard. Now my concern, which goes back to, again, conversation we were having at MediaTek, is, okay, well, what happens then when the grid is great? I don't know how it gets invested in, if Elon's going to do that or a consortium is to get more of these. But once all those cars have access to it, are we going to wait an hour and a half when we're road tripping to
I don't think it's going to be an issue because Tesla is rolling out so many superchargers. I think Tesla is turning into an energy company. Like, honestly, I don't even care if they stop making cars in 5 years at this point.
Yeah.
Like, to me,
Yeah.
it's like, this is one thing that they've nailed. And they're continuously, like, every time I travel down the I-5 West Coast here from Canada
I see
to
it.
the Bay Area, I'm seeing more of them. Like, it's like every 2 months or so I see more.
Yeah.
It's I think that they're going to grow faster than, because remember, there's not that many legacy EVs out there. Like, there's not that many non-Teslas yet. Now, you're going to say that's going to ramp up, but I don't think it's going to ramp up fast enough to overtake what Tesla is doing with supercharging at this point. Hopefully not. And if it does, like, half of those stations are empty. I go to a supercharger to 48 stalls and there's 3 people on them in the middle of the week on a road trip. Now, on holidays, it's going to be a problem, but I think that's going to be a problem no matter what, right?
Right. Well, and the question is to the smart side where it can actually direct you on your path to a charging station that's not busy. Will those other cars do that too? Like, will everybody basically have a way to say, because ultimately, like, one of the things I've heard people in the industry talk about is, well, when we think about this idea of smart cars, it'd be nice if they all talked to each other and kind of knew, like, in this scenario, like, well, let's not overload this grid. Like, I think Waze does this, to be honest with you. Like, it doesn't put everybody down the same path.
I think what's happening, that's Tesla's APIs do that. Like, right now, they support that.
But do other cars going to do that? That's my point. Like,
well, I think that's going to be a condition of them integrating with the supercharger network. Because remember, Tesla is going to provide the solution. Like, Ford, you're going to pay on your Ford account, and when you plug in, it's going to talk to the Tesla APIs. And so when you navigate with your Ford, it's going to talk to the Tesla APIs to see if those supercharger networks are available or not. I mean, Ford already does that with their Electrify America integration. So now it doesn't work very well because Electrify America's APIs are crap, and mostly, their real-time data is not accurate. But I think that Tesla has proven that their stuff is accurate. And I think there's going to be growing pains, 100%. But I don't think long-term this is going to be a big deal. And I think, if anything, we're going to be able to see people without thinking, like I do right now with my Tesla, just get in the car and drive somewhere.
Yeah.
Which is
awesome. I think the point in where I think this will be very interesting to see is 20% of cars on road in this country, for example. I know that, like, Norway and others, it's like 80%, but in this country, in the United States, once we get to that, I think if we've got stuff worked out, it'll grow really quickly from that point on with just where automobiles are going. But we're not there yet. It's still very small. But that's that. We have a little bit of growing pains in between that and call that 20% of cars on road. But that's where, if it's not set by then, I think we have a different problem.
100%. We'll see how it goes, but I'm very positive. I think Tesla cannot mess this up. They know it, and they're going to impose a lot of very big conditions on these legacy car makers, and even the non-legacies like Rivian and Lucid, who are now on board as well. The other thing is that the White House has actually, now that it's SAE approved, put their weight behind NACS, and they're saying, we consider this to be a standard that should be adopted for the federal infrastructure that we're developing. And I think that's a pretty damn great blessing to have. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's going to be an exciting year for EVs and in 24. And I think that I'm actually very excited about, because, maybe someday I can not have a Tesla and be a happy camper. We'll see how it goes. Ben, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, all your various social media handle, and where they can find you at Creative Strategies and all that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm just at Ben Bajari on Twitter. I don't call it X, so I'd still call it Twitter.
Same.
Probably never will. My company, Creative Strategies, you can actually go there, sign up for our newsletter if you want to see the regularity of our research posts, where we share research as well as just things that we write at creativestrategies.com, where most of my written material is. And then we have some video on that. And then also, if you like semiconductors, I have a semiconductor podcast called The Circuit, which you can find on any podcast platform. We're hosted with my friend Jake Goldberg, who was a longtime semiconductor industry veteran as well. So if you like semis, that's the semiconductor podcast. Other way to find me is there, The Circuit.
Awesome. And folks, check out Ben on social. Lots of great commentary and insight. I love talking with you every time we run into each other because
Same.
not only
Me
do
too.
we just nerd out like naturally we would, but like I think we're very aligned on a lot of things, which, you know, is really cool because like we don't cover the same things all the time. Like I don't cover semiconductors much, and you know, you don't just do phones, and you certainly don't do cars as much as I do. So it's always refreshing. Folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl, that's TNKGRL, like the comic book character. Just drop all the vowels. That's my handle on Twitter and on Threads and on Insta and on Blue Sky. So if you want to chat with me and Ben, find us on any of these networks. Well, Threads is probably my favorite right now, honestly, I'll be frank. So go there. And then my Insta is where you're going to find pretty pictures of phones and cars and travel and food and all the things I love. I still use it very much like a photo platform. Every now and then you'll see a reel. But check out the Instagram. Check out the podcast at mobiletechpodcast.com. If you're new here, please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. We're on all the major platforms: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, everywhere good podcasts can be found. Don't forget to rate or review the show if your app lets you do that. And then YouTube is also another vehicle for content. There's some occasional unboxings and hands-on videos. So that's youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. You know how that works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, comment. You can comment about the podcast. I'm happy to chat with you there too. Finally, if you want to support the podcast, there's a Patreon, patreon.com/TNKGRL. That's patreon.com/Tankgirl. You get access to an exclusive early video version of this podcast if you want. It comes out about a day or two in advance, and you get to see us talk in person and sometimes hold some phones. So check it out if you can support. It's pretty affordable. I'd appreciate it. There's other perks there as well if you can't afford the video version. Check it out, patreon.com/TNKGRL. And finally, I want to thank our sponsor this week, Mint Mobile. You know I review a lot of phones, so I'm constantly juggling multiple devices. While that's fun, it also means I'm spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. Thankfully, there's Mint Mobile, and that's who I'm teaming up with for today's podcast. If you want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. You've probably seen the Mint Mobile ads featuring Ryan Reynolds, but let me quickly tell you how fantastic their service is, especially for tech-savvy early adopters like us. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current devices and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM card free of charge. The whole process only takes 15 minutes, and if you get stuck, Mint has a great customer service team to get you through it. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link, mintmobile.com/mobiletech, to get premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And Ben, I want to thank you for being my guest this week. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. I always wondered when you were going to have me on, so I appreciate the time. You have everybody else we know, so I was like, someday she's going to ask me. I'll say yes. So
I'm happy to have you on again at some point soon. We'll definitely make that happen. And folks, you know we'll have another show next week, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.